as you were walking in that vineyard, the leaves and the soil was thin as you got to it, and then you had a soil change. Does it change the characteristic of the wine?
No, but what it does mean that we pick it in different times. So we'll pick the piece that you saw where the leaves are falling off. That was going to get picked the next day, and it will be made in a different way. And then the grapes that had the leaves on will be going to be picked 2 days later. But we will probably do more extraction on that because it's going to have better acidity, whereas the other one's going to have higher pH. So this is how you make complex wines from one vineyard, is by having different soils and using different extractions, which is basically what I do with Catherine and Yeoman. So it's the same thing that we're doing down there in Chile as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so the main reason why you guys are here today is and I've just hit record, so is to talk about Argentina. So if you were to, let me shrink the size of you guys. So if you were to look at where we are, this is a map that this is not a map that I've used before, but Santiago is basically here. This is the state of Mendoza, and we have 4 appellations in Mendoza, which we'll talk about. The other place that we make wine in is San Juan, which I made wine in San Juan when I was the chief winemaker at Allied Domecq. We had a winery called Grafina, and that's made in San Juan. And then there's a little bit made up in La Rioja. So obviously you can tell who conquered who. These were the Spaniards, these were the Italians, and these were the French. So each country had its own little conquest in Argentina. And so and that's why Mendoza basically has bought over varietals as a result. Looking at the appellations really specifically now within Mendoza, I like to say there's 4 appellations. The big one down here is called San Rafael. We used to, when I was again at Allied Domecq, we had a winery here called Belby. I don't like this area very much because the altitude drops very quickly, and so the big problem in Argentina is hail, and this area normally gets hail, and it's really hard to deal with vineyards that are destroyed by hail, and we get 3 big hailstorms every 4 years, so yeah, it's not great. The traditional area is what we call the eastern region. This is the area where most of the wineries are built. The land is a bit cheaper down here, it's a bit flatter, and the roads are a little easier to get around, and of course you're heading in the right direction to get to Buenos Aires. Now, to drive from Mendoza to Buenos Aires is 18 hours, so it's quite a hike, but it's very flat. And of course these are the Andes, but there's another range that comes through here that separates what we call the Central Valley. Now the Central Valley is the exclusive area. This is Agralo, Ugateche, Pedregal, Lujan. This is where, when I was the winemaker for Terraces, so I was a winemaker at Terraces for 9 years, I would stay here, and this is very close to the city. When I started working, believe it or not, in 1992, when I first went to Mendoza, there was only 900,000 people. Now there's 3.2 million. So it's grown very rapidly. It's the 4th largest city in Argentina, after Cordoba, and then La Rosaria and Buenos Aires. Those 2 cities are both in Buenos Aires, of course. And then this is the newer, we call it the newer area, but it's not really. It's because we put the road in, and the road has really sped up the traffic that can get in. There was this central region in Uco Valley has been around a long time. So where we are in Altamira, those vineyards that you'll see, they're 80 years old. We started planting to the north in Tupungato around 1990, and La Consulta around 1995. San Carlos, you'll often hear the regions called San Carlos, Tunajan, and Tupungato. Those are the main, they're sort of sub-regions. It's very complicated the way they do it in Argentina, but so don't worry about it. So this is a close-up look at the area of the Uco Valley, and I find this map fascinating because these are the Andes, and so you get the alluvial soils and the co-alluvial soils, and of course we have high levels of calcium carbonate, which is the white alkaline soil, and so those are the mineral characters that you get from a lot of Burgundy, and so you have those same sort of soils here as well. So, and the traditional area here is right in here, and we are in Altamira, which you'll see in a minute, and Vista Flores. So there's two main rivers, the Tunajan River and the Tunis River, and they flow down into the Mendoza River eventually. Okay, so everything in Argentina is one crazy country, man. So this is a schnitzel. This is how big. So this is the first time. This is my mate Eduardo Elampati. He lived in Argentina for a long time. He's actually Chilean, but a good friend of mine. In fact, he's unbelievable. He's lost about 200 pounds. You wouldn't recognize the guy. So he took me to this restaurant. He goes, no, Nick, we'll just have one schnitzel. This is in Tunajan. And sure enough, look at the size of the damn thing. They know how to. I don't know if I had anything else that day. I might have had a bit of arugula and a bit of lemon. That was about it.
Still not sure what a schnitzel is.
Wiener Schnitzel. So it's a very thin steak.
Is it breaded and fried?
It's fried. It's breaded and fried. No, I eat schnitzel here all the time. I just get
veal, isn't it, Nick?
I get
It's
flat
veal.
steak. It's a traditional Austrian dish. When you go to Austria, when I was in Vienna, I eat schnitzel every night, man. It's great.
Yeah, it's pounded veal.
There you go.
Very, very thin. If you can hear me.
We can hear you, JJ.
Pounded veal.
Pounded veal, very, very thin, breaded, and then fried in a very hot oil. It's absolutely delicious, and Nick is right. I had the pleasure of living in Vienna years ago, and the Wiener Schnitzel is amazing, and you get hooked on it.
I think that was all I ate when I was there last year. Okay, so Argentina's really a cool place. The corruption is decreasing with the new president, we hope, but inflation's around about 38%. It's a totally cash society. If you ever want to hire someone to be your financial manager, you should hire someone from Argentina because they know how to do it. You have to get permission to travel outside the country. There's no imports. So that's crazy in itself. And in fact, they figured out that, of course, the 50 peso note is printed in Brazil. So if you get anything bigger than a 50 peso note, it's usually duct taped or it's got scotch tape or whatever holding the currency together. And of course, it gets worth less every day. If you want to travel, you can only take $50 a month out of the bank, and you can only take it out in euros. I could talk all day, euros or British pounds or US dollars. But so most people do deals outside the country. So the way we get our wine outside is we have a mate who's he imports Mercedes into Argentina, and so we switch currencies outside, which is pretty much the way everybody else does it as well. But you don't see the great wines from Argentina here because 80% of wine, Argentinian wine, is actually consumed in Argentina, which is quite different to Chile. So Chile, there's only 20% of the wine is consumed in Chile, and that's why they export more than Argentina. So those are some of the wineries that I've worked for: Terrazas, Fulos, Argento, Doña Paula, Finger Origin. I didn't add Balbi and Grafina. I should have added that. But today I work just with two wineries, and then I have a very good friend of mine, Juan Pablo de Piñas, and I interviewed him in the vineyard. I'm going to show you that as long as I don't bore you too much. And we're specifically in Uco Valley in Altamira for Pedrusco, and we also work with Finca Agostina, who has a vineyard in Uco and Vistalba, and that's where we make the Chacras. These are the two labels that we make. And Chacras is the name of the town where all the winemakers live. And I used to have an apartment there for about 10 years. I had an apartment there. I shared it with another guy. And so that's what we called it, Chacras, which is it's basically where all the winemakers live. And it reminds me of Healdsburg. So it goes restaurant, bar, and tasting room here in Healdsburg. But in Chacras, it goes restaurant, bar, and butcher shop. So on Saturdays and Sundays, there's about 10 butcher shops on the square. It's unbelievable. You're still going to take a number and come back in a couple of hours. That's how popular barbecuing is, or having an asado. And I'll show you a photo of that in a second.
And just if anybody wants to know, we do have a case and a half remaining of the 2016 Pedrusco. but because we moved on to the 2017, but we do have a case and a half of the 2016.
So this is the Andes at the base. This is not the Pedrusco Vineyard. This is another vineyard that I work on. And this is very nearby though. This is in Gualtarari, which is very, very near Altamira. About the same altitude, but you know, it's not often that you get the snow and the clear sky with the Andes. This is a look at the Chacras Malbec. It's a little bit different to what we do with Pedrusco, but pretty old vines, tight berries, tight clusters. And this is a photo of the bottle that the Chacras is. I think most of you have seen that. And this is young Luke wearing my hat from the Sommelier Summit, I just realized. And here's a quick video of him.
Hey Luke, what do you think of the Malbec here? Pretty cool?
Dark and purple. Dark and purple.
It's pretty old. It's an old vineyard. Check out the post.
Loose clusters. Something a little bit different than I'm used to down in South America.
Awesome. I'm glad you had a chance to enjoy it.
So Luke worked in at Catena Winery. So he was about an hour east from where we were. So he hadn't been up in the vineyards much, so it was quite cool to take him up there.
G'day, Nick Goldschmidt here. I'm the winemaker for Chacras. Chacras is a Malbec that's grown at very high altitude. It's a very unique project that we're working on, very limited production. We only make about 500 cases in any year. The unique thing is very small berry for Malbec. A traditional Malbec would probably be another 20% heavier. This is very small berry. 50-year-old vineyard, which is also quite unique. You don't get that for the quality and the price that we're selling Chacras at. The name Chacras comes from the little town where all the winemakers live in Mendoza, and we're about 50 minutes, almost an hour away from that place, high up here in the Uco Valley. The sub-appellation is called Altamira, which is one of the oldest, most traditional areas, and you'll notice there's no irrigation here, there's no manguera, there's no hose. There's no hose here doing the irrigation. This is all furrow irrigated, traditional grape growing, and hence we get really small berry, very intense. And when you drink this wine, you're going to get a lot of cool climate, fresh fruit, great acidity, and just an amazing, amazing wine. Chacras by Goldschmidt Vineyards. I hope you get a chance to enjoy it. Salute.
So there's a couple of things in that video that I didn't point out. Number one, did you notice the weeds were about as high as me? Again, we don't use any herbicides there. We don't need to in these very old vineyards. I do have a video of what furrow irrigation is, but I didn't want to put it up there. But basically it's we make little trenches on either side of the vine, and we manually put the water down there. I've got a really cool video if you guys want to see it. Maybe I'll send it to Karen, but where the guy moves the stones as he opens up each trench as we walk down the vineyard. It's very traditional, and it was the way it was always done. Okay, jumping over to the wine that I'm drinking. This is the Pedrusco, and Pedrusco means round stones or river stones, which is what the wash was as it came off when the river was in a different location. We called it Para Altamira because we're separating. I can go either way. This is not my decision. But we're separating the old part of Altamira to the new part of Altamira. So this is the old part of Altamira, and it's a pretty rare, pretty small little appellation. There's only about 4 wineries actually in the area, and there's about 18 wines being made from the area, and we're one of them. And we only make 40 cases, so that tells you how small the appellation is. So anyway, I'm going to show you a couple of things here. This is standing in the vineyard. You can't tell, but we're like 3 stories up on top of the roof of the house, and we're looking out towards the vineyard. So we take Chacras from 2 vineyards, one from in here, and then one from a little vineyard just outside the Altamira appellation. So about 80% comes from this vineyard, and 20% comes from another vineyard, as I said. This is the barbecue pit that we have at the property. These are the black sausage, which I love. I eat tons of these things when I'm in Argentina, and the chincholinos, which are the intestines, and sweetbreads. So, you know, we eat all the real stuff. This is the Pedrusco Vineyard. You can see it's just really hands off. This is an old sandy soil. These vineyards are 80 years old, but they don't show much growth because it's so cold up at this altitude. So even though the latitude is not that far south, the altitude is so high. In fact, I've skied down the avenue on the end of the road here in previous vintages in the winter. And you can see, you would not see this in New World vineyards. This is just an old tree that they use for the end posts. Whereas, of course, we use, you know, uniform stakes and posts and all that sort of stuff. So it's pretty cool.
So I'm standing out here in the vineyard in Altamira, and I'm with Juan Pablo Lapinez, one of my oldest, bestest friends ever in the history of Mendoza. But he's also the expert for the appellation. So I'm going to ask him, like, JP, what makes Altamira unique in the Uco Valley versus the rest of the valley, and then what makes it different to, you know, what we got down in the Central Valley that we all know, Vistalba, Luján, etc. What makes this area unique?
Well, the Paraje Altamira is a mixture of high altitude and cool climate region. Plus, we are very close from the mountain and the origin of the Tunotan River. And Paraje Altamira is sitting on the alluvial fan of the Tunotan River. So basically, this is a mixture of very shallow and a little bit deeper soils that are mostly silty, a little bit sandy. And then we have all rocks that are covered with carbon calcium, and that's one of the factors. But for me, it's very important the cool climate, the high altitude plus the soil. Then we have a muscle selection of what we call the old vines of Paraje Altamira that has its own character. Most of all the plants that we have in this area are on their own rootstocks, are very old Malbec that were brought by the immigrants, and for me have a great deal of the character of the area. And that's basically it.
And what altitude are we at here?
Now here in meters we're around 1,150 meters. It's not the highest in the Uco Valley, but it's one of the coldest.
And the climate, I mean, we're standing here in the afternoon and we already got a sea breeze.
Yeah.
I mean, a breeze from the mountains coming.
This is a typical character of the Altamira. We are so close to the mountain that we always have this wind. It's not a strong wind, but as you can see, it's always this breeze that is very healthy for the vines, and for me, when we get these summer rains, it's fantastic because it dries out very, very fast, everything.
So if I drink a Malbec from this vineyard, from this place, how is it going to taste, say, Vistalba, Luján,
It tastes good.
I love that.
Now, basically, this is what I always been telling you, and I always say that the Malbecs from this area, from Paraje Altamira, they don't seem like a traditional Malbec, because usually here we have, because of this terroir character, we have more of a floral, herbal freshness character. Then comes the fruit. In the upper Mendoza River region, which are fantastic wines as well, the Malbec is more fruit-driven, and then you have the floral. But the uniqueness of the Malbec of this terroir is mostly that floral, herbal freshness character that is fantastic.
And then the last question is, you know, we got a 80-year-old vineyard around the place here. What do you think old vines bring to the new vines that are being planted here in Altamira? How are they different?
No, what we are trying to do in our property is we try to nurse from the old material. So we are trying to keep that character with the old vines that were planted here originally. That's for me is one of the characters of the terroir. And most of the people in the Paraje Altamira, the old part of the Paraje Altamira, we're sitting here, is trying to get a hold of that character from the traditional and the immigrants maybe 100 years ago.
So we're standing up here in Altamira. I'm with Juan Pablo Piñas and just having a look at his vineyard. What an amazing place.
Beautiful.
I don't know, that always worries me when I see, I know the area so well, when you see clouds like that, that's the beginning of a sonda. So the wind, so when you see a vertical cloud, you know that the airplane is going to be very bumpy.
Oh.
And I was flying out the next morning, so I was hoping those clouds were going to go away. But that afternoon breeze is like, you could see me sweating, but the breeze was cool, you know, and that's the key. So we're at high altitude. We're not the high, as Juan Pablo Piñas said, we're not at the highest altitude, but we're at the coldest, because that's where the breeze comes through off the Andes. Really, really unique spot. And JP is a really unique character. So they call him the Son of God because he, that's his nickname, is Son of God, because he knows absolutely everybody and everything. And he's a great personal friend of mine. So I've known him for probably 15 years. And that property, he married really well. So the property is his wife's property. And we're lucky enough, so I get mates rates. And that's why Chacras is like an unbelievable price. And yet, Paul Hobbs makes Cobos Grand Reserva from that property, which sells for that's his $120 bottle that he sells in Argentina, and Grand Nicolas, which is $250 a bottle, which comes from the same block that we make Pedrusco from. So we're very lucky to know him and work with him.
I have a question, Nick.
The
Yeah.
Pedrusco Vineyard.
All right, I'm just going to hold it. Yeah, Karen.
Where did he say that the original vines came from? He mentioned that.
Yeah, so the original vines, well, it's a little complicated, but there's two forms of Malbec. There's the Malbec that you guys think you know, which is Malbec. But actually, the cultivar that was originally planted in Argentina was called Cot, C-O-T, which is now what they call the French clone of Malbec. And the Cot, there's a big cluster and it has a wing on it. What we term as Malbec does not have a wing on it. It just has one. It just has the main rachis, but it was all French, and the original area was Vistalba, and that's where a lot of those plantations have come from. A lot of these growers today are trying to preserve some of the original material. And that's why these vineyards that are grown on their own roots are very rare, especially at high altitude. And these are the ones that they come in and select cuttings from. So they'll see this vine behind me in this photo. You can see that they'll probably take cuttings from that vine, whereas the vine next to it is probably very low, you know, it's probably near death. And so they won't take cuttings from that. So it's been selected over time, but this is why when you discuss with an Argentinian winemaker whether the wine is Cot or whether it's Malbec, they don't want to have that conversation, because Cot produces a hell of a lot more. It's more spicy. It comes on earlier, whereas Malbec is more difficult. It's lower crop. It's cooler. So at the Staircase Vineyard, we have planted two different clones of Malbec. Just as a trial, well, not as a trial, but I'm going to make two different Malbecs off the Staircase Vineyard eventually when it gets old enough. And
which is the new vineyard in Alexander Valley.
Yeah, which is a new vineyard in Alexander Valley.
You're also calling that Stonemason, that vineyard.
Well, Stonemason is one block or two blocks in the Staircase Vineyard. We're going to make Malbec from, I planted 2 years ago the first block of Malbec, and I'm going to plant another block next year of Malbec. But these, when you contact the nurseries here in Napa, Sonoma, the first thing they want to sell you is Cot. And unless you know what clone you're talking about, it's Cot. And so I had to be very fussy, and it took me quite a while to find the right plant material.
I have another question, quick question. So do they have any natural sort of disease in this area, or is it pretty pristine because of the cool weather?
Correct, Karen.
Yeah.
And that's why I said when I was standing in the Chilean vineyard earlier, the future is north, south, and altitude. I mean, my generation is obviously we've got a lot of Napa Sonoma wines to make and sell, and it's a big part of the industry. But since we're planting clones and we're getting yield, it's very hard for me to like the wine like Singing Tree is very hard to make because to find that sort of plant material is very difficult. It's a Marsal, you know, it's not a clone. It's an old, as you know, it's an old field selection. So trying to find vineyards like that these days are becoming more and more rare because people are planting clones because they want fast sugar accumulation. They want lots of tons. But I think my son's generation, I mean, farm to gate today is very important. These small producers, if you look at France, Germany, Italy, that's the way people sell wine. There's two ways to sell wine. You're either farm to gate or you're negociant, you know, like Constellation Treasury or whatever. So, but I think the next generation is going to break barriers and go into not only, you know, we're starting to do it ourselves a little bit. So, you know, some of you saw me put up, we crushed some Carignan this year that was over 100 years old. Long story, but I didn't even know the vineyard existed, and we crushed it. Man, it's unbelievable. I selected each vine. I marked all the vines that I wanted to harvest from because I didn't want to take a wide sway of the vineyard. I just wanted to take specific vines, and the wine is incredible. And then planting in Moyeco and making these wines at high altitude, and as you know, I'm working in Canada at the 39th parallel as well, and I don't think we're far enough north yet. So I'm still trying to push to go up to a place called Kamloops. So I work in the Okanagan Valley, which is in British Columbia, where there's 4 major lakes. But the next appellation to the north is Vernon, and then the one even further north is Kamloops. And Kamloops has a little lake there, but with this global uncertainty, or whatever the climate we want to call it, it's becoming warmer and more interesting. And right now they only grow hybrids up there, but some people are just starting to plant vinifera. So that area is going to be interesting too. So that's the future for wine for me, is smaller, more robust, cooler. And these Malbecs that some of you have tried the Chacras, and hopefully some of you have tried the Pedrusco. These things are unbelievable because even though they're in a warm climate, they give totally cool climate characters because of the altitude. So it's the same as growing. You get a coastal influence at a high altitude. It's quite crazy. And as you heard JP say, I mean, you get the spiciness and this lushness and this freshness, and with calcium carbonate, because of the soil, you get this alkalinity that really makes the mouth water when you drink these wines.
So one other quick little question, I'm full of it today. I know, phylloxera, they've never had phylloxera here?
There's no phylloxera in Argentina.
And it's original rootstock, they don't graft?
They graft sometimes these days when we don't do a lot of irrigation, but if you know, in the eastern region where they farm for tons, they will put it on rootstock and irrigate, and then they can get more tons. But up here, Franco, which is what they say, which means on their own roots, they don't. They do it because they do irrigate. But the problem is, the main problem with Franco is that you don't get a very good set. And you'll see in this next video how low the yields are. Now, if we'd planted on a rootstock, we would have had better set. When I say set, the cluster, all the flowers turn to berries, but that's not normal for Malbec. When it's grown on its own roots, you don't always get a really good set. The classic variety that we always talk about is Merlot. Merlot on its own roots does not give a very good yield at all, and that's why most Merlot is planted on rootstock.
And would this be St. George rootstock, or is it something specific for?
St. George is only in California. And St. George is not resistant to phylloxera. The only reason why St. George can survive with phylloxera is it's super vigorous. But St. George is actually Vitis vinifera, so it's not resistant to phylloxera.
So they have their own rootstock that isn't available in California and vice versa?
No, they don't use any rootstock. It's all Franco.
Okay.
But the rootstocks they use are the same rootstocks we get in California, if they do use them in the eastern region. They use the same ones that we know. I don't like the rootstocks that they use, but they're the same ones that we know.
Mhm.
So the only wine that we make on St. George right now, if you drink the Grace Point Petite Syrah and the Grace Point Zinfandel, those wines are both grown on St. George.
And these vines in Chile and Argentina have all come originally from France?
Well, they came from everywhere. They were conquered by the Spaniards, the French, and the Italians, depending on which year it is.
Mm-hmm.
But mainly, obviously, they speak Spanish, so they were mainly conquered by the Spaniards. So that's why Uruguay mainly grows Tempranillo. Mexico is a really interesting country if you go to the Guadalupe, and that's where I work, and I'm actually thinking of taking another job down there, because the Guadalupe in Mexico is a very unusual appellation, because seriously, it was conquered by every country, and each country brought their religious wines to that region. So it's
Interesting.
It's a really unique area. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Wearing my Goldschmidt hat. I don't know if you can see that.
Give me a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you were going to go down in Mexico, would you go up to altitude, like more east, rather out of the Sonora?
Okay, so the Guadalupe is a really interesting area. So, of course, most people know it where the cruise ships come in. And
Right.
so that's where, Encinitas, that's where we used to hang out. When I worked for Alo Domecq owned the biggest winery in Mexico. And so everyone just comes to cruise ships and they get in a bus and they go to the winery, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem there is the salinity. There's so much salt in the soil, and there's so much phylloxera and nematodes. You've got every disease that you could possibly imagine, and you've got glassy wing sharpshooters, blue-green sharpshooters, your typer. It's a disaster, and no water and high salinity. It's a disaster.
Jeez.
So then they started farming a little bit further north, and then further up, they started planting about 10 years ago, and that's the area that I'm interested in. So it's one valley, but because the winds come from the south, it's too warm in the main area of Encinitas. So that's why we've been going further up the hill and away from the ocean. Like another interesting area is because when I worked in Brazil for Chandon there's two areas in Brazil. So I don't know if you know, in the northern Brazil, you get 3 crops every 2 years. Okay. So the way you throw the vine into dormancy is by pruning it and cutting the water off. And we grow the vines very tall, and we can get on a rowboat and we row around underneath the vineyards. It's pretty funny. But then in Sao Paulo, we used to fly into Sao Paulo and drive from there for about an hour and a half, and you get into the Andes and you're talking about high altitude, so you're making real wine. So they're making champagne, of course, in Brazil. So this is the same sort of thinking that we can apply in Mexico, is when you're talking about, they're basically the same. Well, Brazil's even warmer in terms of latitude, but at least we can get more altitude if we get away from the coast. And so it makes it a little bit more interesting.
Nick, I got to sign off, but I've been to Mendoza in Argentina, and having been to Italy and France, totally different of my opinion of the how they make the wines there. Much more modernized equipment and everything else. And not saying that I would never go back, but I still have a lot more fun in France and Italy than I do Argentina. The other thing is I found some very pretty good wines, very affordable when we were there. And I've got friends here. We shipped back a skid, like 60 cases of wine. I think at that time the whites were like $8.50 a bottle, and the Malbecs were like $12.50, and then we had some sparkling red. And everybody, all my friends would buy 2 or 3 cases, and that's a wonderful experience doing something like that. But when I go back, I'm not a winemaker, I'm a consumer.
So Jim,
You're explaining a lot of things about the countryside, and I remember many of it, but I didn't know the impact back then when I was there as much as I know now. So
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, Chile and Italy, I mean, France and Italy, Germany are done, as far as I'm concerned. And we know what they've got. Every appellation has been explored. Chile and Argentina, or even New Zealand and some parts of Australia, have not been fully explored, and even California have not been fully explored. And also the traditional winemaking is you know, as I keep forgetting which stories I've told and haven't told. I mean, we were making wine in concrete in 1982. We just get sewer pipes and dig a big hole, and we get 4 sewer pipes and drop them in the hole, and we made a tank. I mean, this is cool because you got the natural soil is giving you the coolness for the ferment, so you didn't need refrigeration or anything like that. I mean, and now everything's concrete's cool. What? You know, and so look, winemaking can be too easy. California is easy. France is easy. Italy is easy. These are all easy places. Making wines in these locations is not easy. I already said, you know, you've got the problems with the economy and you're talking about really dubious environments where you're at stuff, you know, you're at the whim of the weather. And I mean, for me as a winemaker, this is far more interesting. Look, if you want to buy, Jim's gone, I see, but you can buy a cheap wine that you can buy wine in Chile for $18 a case.
Sure.
But it's not very interesting, you know. Anyway, just my opinion, because I'm a winemaker.
So Nick, when you're down there, do you have to worry about any gang-related cartels, or are you paying off people?
Okay, I'll tell you 2 stories. So firstly, in Chile, we have the problem with Mapuche. So the Indians can walk onto people's lands and take the land. And that is happening more and more frequently. The government will not step in. And so they've got huge problems with that. There's a very famous winery in Argentina that the corruption in Argentina is far more extreme than the corruption in Chile. There's governmental corruption amongst themselves, but not corruption as we know corruption. But in Argentina, there's plenty of corruption. So a very famous winemaker who you know very well found out that every truck that showed up to the winery, the driver got $400 cash. $200 went in his pocket, and $200 went to the wharfie who unloaded the truck. He found out about it and refused to pay it. So what happened was, once the container arrived at the wharf, they broke into the back of every container, and they stole between 1 and 50 cases, and then gave them to restaurants in Buenos Aires. So 2 things happened. Firstly, he couldn't sell any wine in Buenos Aires to restaurants. And secondly, every container had to be unstacked when it arrived in Europe because they didn't know how many cases were in it. He now pays $1,000 per container.
Good job, Nick.
True story. It's not me, thank God. I paid a $400. Actually, I don't even pay the $400. I pay $200 because we ship our Argentinian wine. We ship to Chile. We ship it out of Santiago rather than ship, because we don't want to ship to New York. We want to ship to California.
Yeah, crazy.
All right, so here's a little video of Pedrusco.
2-3 clusters per plant, planted 80 years ago. Altamira, high altitude. Very intense. Let's see if I can find a berry. Ah, we found one. Very small clusters, only like 2-3 clusters per plant.
No video here. Oh,
Close to how?
here it is.
Fleshy and ripe and rich. So this will be the 2020 Pedrusco. Amazing. Hopefully you can see that. Check out the soil. Very sandy, and that's what makes it unique. Anyway, hope you all get a chance to try it, Pedrusco.
So just wrapping up, these are the wines that we sell. We have the Chacras Old Vine, Malbec, which is about $25, and then the Pedrusco, which is older vine, Malbec at 62. It was pretty funny. I showed a video the other day to, I put it online, and I had this, the Chacras, and a pretty well-known winemaker sent me an email back going, dude, hit me on Facebook and goes, dude, you know, It doesn't look like a 50-year-old vine. The thing is that winemaker, that particular winemaker that asked me the question, is from the Okanagan Valley, and it's the same thing. Their 50-year-old vines look really thin as well, because they're at such high altitude. Those vines just really struggle to get through the season. And then also from the Southern Hemisphere, we sell the two Sauvignon Blancs, which you know about. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to show you on Chile and Argentina. And I'm drinking the Pedrusco.
How does it taste?
Me too.
Oh, good.
It's delicious, but this is a 2017.
That's what I'm drinking. That's exactly what I'm drinking. The 17 Pedrusco.
Cheers.
What characteristics do you get in the wine?
Well, the first thing on this wine is it just goes in like this. It's like fleshy and sweet and round, and whereas Chacras is really unusual that 80% of the Chacras comes from the block next door. If you drink in Chacras, you get more red fruit, more acidity. So again, it's like drinking Catherine versus Hillary. You drink the Catherine during dinner, I drink the Chacras during dinner, and then I'll drink the Pedrusco when I'm having the cheese course afterwards, because it's got so much flesh and so much texture, and
it does.
Man, it's been a while. I haven't had
It's
this
rich.
for a while.
It's rich.
It's rich because we've got the 18 on the water right. Well, the 18 will be on, as soon as this thing goes away, we'll be able to put the 18 on the water, because I just blended the 18s and we bottled them about 3 weeks ago, so they'll be on the water as soon as we can, along with the next vintage of the Chacras as well.
And for ageability on these 2017 Malbecs, how long could they sell her for?
Well, I've been making wine from this vineyard since 1995 under another label, and I know that those wines, I had a bottle of that particular wine about a month ago, and I had the 98 vintage, which was not that great a vintage. It was a colder vintage in Argentina, or in the Uco Valley, and that wine is still pristine, still very purple. The color holds really well. Like, I'm looking at the 17 now, it's deeper and richer than what we get for Cabernet from Napa Valley. The Chacras, if I'd open the Chacras is going to be a little bit more on the purpler side, whereas Pedrusco is going to be more on the deep red side.
And they're both 100% Malbec, no cot in either of them.
No, well, Argentinians will tell you that cot's, oh, Nick, what do you mean? Cot is Malbec. Oh, so Mr. Winemaker, why does it ripen earlier? Why do you charge me a different price? And why does it have a wing on it? Oh, Nick, no. I don't want to have those conversations. You know? So let's face it, when you buy a Malbec under $15, it's not Malbec. It's cot.
It's cot. Good to know.
And the Argentinians drink their own Malbec. They drink the good stuff for the most part. That you're saying it doesn't really get out of the country.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, I'll tell you a story. So I had dinner the other night with a very famous winemaker down there and the vineyard manager. And I said to them, what do you do with your money on Thursdays? The vineyard manager goes, I immediately go to the bank and I change everything into euros and I stuff it in my mattress. And the winemaker goes, screw that. I put it on my credit card and I go out and eat and party. And so those are the two options.